we have time now. We've reserved about half an hour for the COPE Forum discussion. And the topic this time is on author affiliations. Now, I remember when I worked in journals, occasionally an author would say that they've changed institution, what should they do? And the standard advice was that the institution where they did the work would be the primary affiliation, and then their current place of work is just the contact address. So things now apparently are becoming very variable, and there are multiple and joint affiliations, and things might be getting out of hand and also open to abuse. So Anna Marisic, who's the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Global Health and also a COPE Council member, will lead us through this discussion and make a presentation and then invite comments. So I'd like to ask Anna to share your screen and mic, and over to you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then thank you everybody for getting together for this forum and this forum discussion. As Trevor said, institutional affiliation is very important. And let me just make sure that I can. And it's really getting more important now that we have this university rankings. Everything is about rankings, so affiliations are getting more important. Also, affiliations are important not only for institutional ranking, but also for the open access, because when the institution are supporting open access publishing, they want to ensure that they are paying for the research that they have funded and where the research was done. And now we have the problem that editors are faced with, that you have what is called octopus affiliations, where you have, I don't know, 5, 10, I have seen even, 12, 11, 15 affiliations on some papers. What to do about that? Should we consider not only the authorship from a point of view of an individual, but should we also consider and see how we can ensure the integrity of the published record with regard to the institutional authorship in some ways? So this is what we're going to discuss today, and I'm going to first see what we have, as evidence. And when we look for different guidance, I have looked at COPE, and we have several cases, but we don't have any specific document on guidance of what the journals can do about institutional affiliations. I have looked at other editorial organizations like the Council of Science Editors, European Association of Science Editors, World Association of Medical Editors, American Psychology Association, which is, a major a body for setting standards in publishing in social sciences. When you look at ICMJE recommendations, they do say that inappropriate attribution of funding sources and affiliations is misleading and should be avoided. So we don't have any specific guidance on this. So when you look at COPE cases, we have several. There are many cases about what would happen if the author changes an affiliation, if the author doesn't have an affiliation but wants to publish something as an individual without an affiliation. And this has been more or less dealt successfully with journals. As Trevor said, you have your affiliation where you did the work. If you're, especially if you're a doctoral or postdoctoral student, you move back home, that's your current affiliation. It may be a note at the bottom of the article, but the affiliation is with the institutions where the research was done. But we have recently had cases, for example, from 2021, about a case where the institutions were paying authors to be named on papers. So this is usually presented and written up as a funding or grant, although it wasn't grant for research, it was payment to put the institution as an author. And as you see here, the published articles had 2 affiliations, and one of them was declared as someone who has given a partial grant. So what was the advice from COPE? And we can think about this in terms of what recommendations, what discussions we have to have. So the advice was that if there are multiple institutional affiliations, the editors may ask authors to explain why and which contributions are from which institution. They may contact the primary university to make sure that they were aware of other institutions that are also affiliated with the researchers. They should ask perhaps for proof of funding in case of dual affiliations, or it's also the forum at that time question whether we should, and this is the discussion that we're having now, whether we should have a policy against funding agencies as affiliations. Can a funding agency be an affiliation, or is it just for funding declarations? So many questions that are open. Then we also have a case of changing of author affiliation. This is similar to what we have discussed or talked about before, where the norm is, I'm not going to go into details of the case, where it was just a typical case that an author changes the affiliation, wants to have the second one as his affiliation in the paper. And what the advice was is that the institution where the work was done has to be the affiliation that is under the byline, and a footnote should indicate the current affiliation and perhaps the corresponding address. And also what Forum said at that time is that this is an advantage of having an ORCID account, because ORCID account would have a record of affiliation of that person, and complete history of their affiliations would be posted there. Then we have some research. I have to say I've picked here research that is kind of questions and emphasize the problems of this octopus affiliation. Although, like the paper from Houghton, Rotten, Lawson, and some other subsequent papers from them, this one from Scientometrics, says that the current multi-collaborative research increases multiple institutional affiliations, and that actually this is a sign of high quality research. And it's true. If you look at the publications of in high impact journals, you will see that multiple affiliations are usually a sign of a kind of higher quality research, where you have the more money, more funds, more researchers collaborating on really a frontier research. But then when you go into smaller scientific communities and smaller scholarly journals, like what was published by Vivian and her colleagues in Learned Publishing in a few years ago, it's very difficult to actually validate the affiliations in their study. I'm quoting here, they were not able to validate more than 1/3 affiliations of Chilean university when you go to the institutional website. And in contrast to what I said just before, one of the COPE cases, ORCID identifiers were not suitable for checking affiliations because many journals didn't use them. So you couldn't use that to check the affiliations. And there was also an interesting survey of more than 300 researchers, I think even 500 researchers, about the opinions of scholars about multiple affiliations. And they said, and only a small number of them said that this is ethical. That adding other institutions, whether they want to please them and help them get a better ranking on a university ranking list, or they got some financial support, that may not be ethical. But they say what should be done is that the funding and acknowledging of contributions of different institutions is recommended, but in an acknowledgement, not as an affiliation. What are initiatives? Definitely, ORCID should be a good place, and that's where the use of ORCID should be increased and promoted, so that we have correct links to the affiliations. And for example, another initiative from ORCID is now this affiliation managers, which is for the institutions, so that they can check and track the impact of the research that is done at their institution. So this is something that maybe the institutional members of COPE can help us with and can perhaps lead a discussion about. Also, ORCID said that they are going to increase support for another registry. We now have registries in order to make the information more open and sharing, like with the clinical trials registries. So there is a registries of research organizations. So as you see here, this is a registry of open persistent identifiers for research organizations. So maybe what is waiting for us is not only having an ORCID to identify us as individual researchers, but also a unique identifier for research institution, because in that way it will be easier to follow and track and appropriately associate research that is published with the support and the institutional authorship. There is also initiative from bibliographical databases, for example, for Clarivate, because they produce these highly cited research affiliations, and then they produce these information that is very much coveted, very important, and tracked. And it's important that there is a proper association between the researcher and then institutions. So they want to support that correct home institutions are reported and presented together with the researchers on papers, so that it's clear which institution can take credit for someone's work or for a highly cited researchers on Clarivate lists, for example. And then finally, there is a recent initiative from a Copyright Clearance Center that are releasing an AI-enabled matching between the institutions and publications, all in order, again, to support the open access publishing by the institutions who are funding open access and would like to then correctly fund and affiliate the work of their researchers that work at that institution. So we have some questions to discuss, and one of them is if there is a definition or institutional affiliation or institutional authorship on a publication, should we work on it? And the second one, I think we can discuss both of them, and then I have another slide for two more questions. When does institutional support merit inclusion as an author affiliation on publication?